particularly proud of is the head of government's address. In past years, we've had the current or former leaders of Japan, Canada, Singapore, Italy, New Zealand, Ireland and Timor-Leste. And this year's head of government address is delivered by the interim leader of Bangladesh, Muhammad Yunus. QCEF, as a platform for exchange, we recognize the value of individuals who transcend politics and exemplify the power of people. Muhammad Yunus is one of only 7 people in the world to have won the Nobel Peace Prize, the US Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Congressional Gold Medal. After pioneering microcredit and microfinance and dedicating his entire life fighting against poverty and advocating for the rights of the most marginalized, the youth of Bangladesh called for him to be the leader of their country, the 8th most populous in the world. He's someone who not only has the trust of his own people, but also, critically, the trust of both the US and China, having earlier this year been the special guests of both President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Muhammad Yunus.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear friends, warm greetings from Bangladesh. This year I had the privilege of meeting 2 leaders whose nations shape our world. President Xi Jinping in Beijing, President Donald Trump in New York during the United Nations General Assembly. Those meetings reminded me of a timeless truth. Human connection is stronger than any difference. Dialogue may not erase borders, but it softens them and opens the way to understanding. It allows us to imagine a future where cooperation replaces confrontation. It is in that spirit that I join you once again at the US-China Hong Kong Forum, a place where people meet when the world most needs unity. This year's forum is special. We mark 3 great anniversaries. 80 years since the end of the Second World War, 80 years since the birth of the United Nations, and 30 years since the Beijing Women's Conference declared that women's rights are human rights. These milestones remind us peace is not something we inherit. It is something we build every day. As we celebrate these anniversaries, let us draw new circles. The first circle, AI, the circle of human wisdom. Artificial intelligence is one of the humanity's greatest creations, but its value depends on how we use it. AI can think and calculate, but it cannot care. The real challenge is the human values behind the machine. Guided by greed, AI deepens inequality. Guided by compassion, it can help feed the hungry, heal the sick, and protect our planet. I propose digital circles for peace, partnerships among the United States, China, and the Global South to ensure technology serves people, not the other way around. Technology should strengthen our humanity, never replace it. That second circle, geopolitics, the circle of shared security. As the United Nations turns 80, we must remember why it was born in the first place. Peace cannot be built on domination. It can only grow from cooperation. When the United States and China work together, the world feels safer. When they include others, hope becomes truly global. In our century, leadership means partnership. Power is not the ability to command. It is the ability to unite. A circle of peace cannot be drawn by one nation alone. It must be drawn together. The third circle, people to people. The circle of human connection. 30 years ago, I was in Beijing at the Women's Conference. I spoke about women in Bangladesh who were changing their lives through microcredit. We gave small loans to women who had nothing, no money, no collateral, but who had courage, resilience, and imagination. 98% of our borrowers were women. They turned those tiny loans into businesses. They turned those businesses into peace in their homes and in their communities. That experience taught me something profound. When you invest in people, especially women and the youth, they invest back in peace. In Bangladesh, young people have always led change. They fought for our independence. They led an unprecedented uprising in July 2024. They now lead the fight for justice, equality, and sustainability. Around the world, youth are standing up, turning ideas into action and hope into progress. If peace is to last, it must belong to them, not as beneficiaries, but as co-creators of our shared future. We must create more places where people from every nation and every generation can live, learn, and work together. Because peace does not begin with policy. It begins with people. It travels through friendship before it is written into law. It's time to rise together and turn our vision into action. Let us work together for what I call a 3-0 world. 0 wealth concentration to end poverty. 0 unemployment by unleashing entrepreneurship for all. 0 carbon emissions by protecting our planet. 3-0 world is not a dream, but a necessity of reality. I invite the China-United States Exchange Foundation to help turn these ideas from inspiration into action by empowering young leaders, encouraging dialogue, and delivering real change. Last year, I asked this forum to keep Bangladesh in your thoughts. Today, as my country stands at a turning point, I repeat that request. We are building a nation where democracy cannot be stolen, where power serves the people, where honesty defeats corruption. We are rebuilding our institutions and shaping a new Bangladesh, one that puts people at the center of governance. Just a couple of weeks ago, we signed the July National Charter, our declaration based in the consensus of all political parties over the constitutional, electoral, and administrative reforms. In February 2026, we'll hold our national election, institutionalizing our commitment to justice and people's power. We are building a nation where corruption ends. But this dream is not only for Bangladesh. It is for our entire world. We must close the gaps between wealth and want, between technology and morality, between power and participation. If we fail to bridge these divides, we'll raise generations who believe the future belongs to others. Let us make a different promise that no one will be left behind on the journey towards freedom, dignity, and peace. Peace is never permanent. It must be renewed each day through justice, inclusion, and compassion. Thank you. Have a great conference.
We spent time with Professor Yunus in Dhaka in June and July, where you really see how poverty feels very differently in that country, that depth of inequity and what he called the gap between wealth and want. And also, again, we spent another week with him in September at the New York General Assembly. I think that he said to me that there is no greater cause right now than the US-China relationship. not because he is American or Chinese, but because he sees himself as a citizen of the world, and he sees the US-China relationship as the one that unlocks the deliverables on the world. So we thank very much Professor Yunus for, again, delivering his address to us. We're going to move now to our second circle, which is geopolitics. Again, we're going to do the keynote, followed by the debate panel, and rounding off with the masterclass. I'll start off, the masterclass to round off is going to be great. It's going to be the former Minister of Defense for Singapore, Minister Ng Eng Hen. But before that, we'll have the panel. And before this, to open it up, we're delighted to welcome Dong Minghao, who is the Deputy Director of the Center for American Studies, a storied center over at Fudan University. Professor Zhao's research is largely focused on Sino-US relations, China's foreign policy, international strategy, and technology security nexus issues. His work has been featured in the New York Times, The Diplomat, the Nikkei, and also the China Daily. Professor Zhao, thank you very much for using your 10 minutes to give us a breakdown on what's on your mind in geopolitics today.
Thank you, James. Good evening, good afternoon, and distinguished guests, young friends. It's so great to give some of my thoughts on the geopolitics of U.S.-China relations. It's no easy task to talk about the geopolitics, especially in the afternoon. So let me start from the U.S.-China summit in Busan. Chinese President Xi Jinping's meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in Busan sent a positive signal to the world. Before the meeting, President Trump posted on social media, the G2 will convene shortly. The concept of G2, a group of two, refers to China and the U.S. collaborating to address global challenges. It was invented in about 2010 or 2009. Trump's mention of the G2 shouldn't be overstated, but it's important to recognize the U.S. president values great power coordination. And I think when we talk about the Trump shock, we need to think about the Trump opportunity. Actually, in late July, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that U.S.-China relations are entering a new phase of strategic stability, quote, strategic stability. So we need to think about what does this mean for U.S.-China relations. The new G2 does not imply that China-U.S. will jointly govern the world, nor does it mean that competition will be replaced by cooperation. Rather, it signifies that both countries recognizes the importance of recalibrating the bilateral relationship, and they are willing to engage in more communication in a multipolar world. While the summit was a good start for repairing ties between these two countries, it did not represent an end to tensions. The success of the summit in South Korea largely hinged on Washington and Beijing adopting a pragmatic approach and apparently setting aside sensitive topics like the Taiwan question. Given the very deep-rooted differences on issues such as trade, export controls, future interactions between these two countries are likely to encounter new setbacks. So Chinese analysts, they have doubts over the sustainability of President Trump's restraint on the Taiwan question. It's very challenging for the two sides to revitalize mutual trust, especially in the military and the security field. Indeed, the summit in Busan can bring about a tactical detente rather than a strategic reset for U.S.-China relations. More efforts are needed from both sides to resolve trade issues and resume policy dialogues. The two sides must use rather than abuse the summit to make substantial progress before Trump's planned visit to China next April. So when I think about the trajectory of U.S.-China relations, I would like to highlight four important issues. The first one, the two sides need to deepen their dialogues over the multipolar world issue. As Secretary Rubio said, in a multipolar world, America must focus on its own interests rather than play the role of global government. Very interestingly, for China, the concept of orderly multipolarity became the new buzzword for China's foreign policy in recent years. So there should be some, synergy or common ground between these two thinking. Beijing worries about the instability associated with such transition. And in particular, the peace in this region is not guaranteed given the conflicts between Thailand and Cambodia, given the conflicts between India and Pakistan this year. Second, the two sides need to seek a new modus vivendi on the Taiwan question and carefully address the linkage among the security hotspots in this region. We are witnessing the militarization of the Taiwan question. The two sides have very different interpretation over what is the status quo across the strait. Many Chinese analysts think America's policy is shifting to the de facto one China, one Taiwan stance, given U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, given American military presence in Taiwan. There are over 700 American military officers in the island, and according to some report, and U.S. arms sales, which include more advanced and offensive weapons. The internal politics of Taiwan is quite tricky, and I think William Lai is the wild card. And more importantly, the key challenge is how to deal with the increasing nexus between the Taiwan question and the South China Sea issue, which could deepen the security dilemma and trigger more conflicts. I was in Vietnam 2 weeks ago. We talked about the U.S. military presence in the Philippines. And what does that mean for the potential Taiwan contingency? It's not a good thing for the U.S. to push the involvement of the ASEAN countries in the Taiwan contingency. Indeed, there is a possibility for miscalculations given the increasing military activities in the region. In particular, U.S.-China military clashes could be very bad for everybody. When I was in Singapore this August for attending the trilateral dialogue among U.S., China, Singapore, the Singaporean defense minister posed a hard question to Chinese and American participants. And he asked, are the U.S. and China prepared for a new EP3 incident? Are we prepared for a new EP3 incident or military clashes between our two countries? So we need to make more efforts to enrich the crisis management and crisis prevention mechanisms. Third, China and the U.S. need to tackle the nexus between technology and security. This morning, many speakers, they talk about technology. With the blurred boundary between civilian and military technologies, we need to reimagine the deterrence in a technopolar world. Both countries are taking an all-in approach in AI. So you may compare the AI strategy released by the White House this July and the AI Plus action plan unveiled by China's State Council in August. So I suggest you compare these two documents, and you would find the geopolitical implications of the rapid technology diffusion could be very, very sweeping and could be very disruptive. For instance, the combination of AI and nukes would make it more difficult to ensure the strategic stability. Beijing is watching the emergence of the technology military complex in the Silicon Valley in the US. The companies such as Palantir and Anduril, they are involved in the weaponization of AI and development of autonomous systems. So we need to promote dialogues on technology security nexus issue and bring stakeholders, including tech elites and policymakers, to figure out the pathway for mutually ensured survival rather than mutually assured destruction. Last but not least, the securitization of people-to-people exchanges is a big problem. The securitization of people-to-people bond is a big problem for us. We need to address the fear of traveling across the Pacific. Our scholars, our students, they worry about the safety when they make trips to the US or China. Such exchanges are critical for having updated assessment and keeping the leaders, the governments in both countries informed about the concerns about the red lines of the other side. The US military stops sending people to learn Chinese language in China. To feel the China society in the mainland, they send people to Taiwan. I think that's a big problem. The so-called leading China economy experts in the United States cannot speak Chinese, and they just use AI tools and data mining. Field research has been critical to increasing the understanding of each other. What we need is a code of conduct for renewed engagement, which is so important for sustaining US-China interaction, for thinking beyond the knowledge bubbles, and for seeking viable solutions for ensuring the peace between our two countries. Time is up. I stop there. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our keynote speaker, Professor Dongming Hao. Let's reset the stage and get this panel going. It's called Outside the Security Lens, Beyond Tariffs, Politics, and Society. It's going to examine how excessive securitization of US-China relations has constrained economics, academia, civil society, and culture. And together they're going to explore practical strategies for managing and reducing securitization in a world where securitization has become a byword for preventing anything getting done. So for this, we have Max Baucus, the 11th U.S. ambassador to China under President Barack Obama, of course, the longest-serving senator from Montana and the former chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He'll be joined by Professor Li Cheng, director of the Center on Contemporary China and the World at HKU, the University of Hong Kong, and formerly head of the China Thornton Center at Brookings in Washington. Stephen Roach, senior fellow at Yale Law School at Yale University, and of course renowned as the former chief economist of Morgan Stanley. Zhu Feng, dean of the School of International Studies at Nanjing University. And to bring all these conversations together, our dear friend David Firestein, the president of the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. David, thanks so much for being with us all the way from Texas, and we'll leave it to you to take it away. You've got your 45 minutes.
James, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and I want to say to the leadership and the entire team of KUSIF, thank you so much for putting on an incredibly important and timely event that brings so many distinguished people together. It's a real honor for me to be moderating this panel of very, very distinguished experts in the field of U.S.-China relations. Dr. Zhao just mentioned the notion of the securitization of the U.S. approach to China, which basically means looking at everything in terms of China through the lens of security, and more specifically, through the lens of the idea that everything China does is designed to hurt us, That's the premise undergirding the idea of the securitization of the U.S. approach to China. And it's also predicated in another idea which we've touched on in various ways so far in this session, and it's the idea that there's no such thing anymore in the mind of most of official Washington as of mutual benefit. That, as Ambassador Barshevsky and others were noting earlier, that we're looking at everything through the lens of zero sum. And the idea that the United States representatives of the U.S. and China can come together and both come away having benefited from that engagement is something that is no longer accepted. And so with that in mind, I want to ask each of our panelists a number of questions, and starting with Ambassador Baucus. The first question is, and this is a question for everyone, when do you think that this securitization of the U.S. approach to China started, and why do you think it started when it did? Was it more a function of what China was doing, or was it more a function of some of the internal political dynamics in the United States?
Well, thank you very much, David. From my experience, it started about 2014 when I was serving as ambassador to China, and that's when Eric Snowden came on the scene. And holy mackerel, the Chinese went berserk. Eric Snowden. Now, they knew we were spying on the United States. They knew that the United States was spying on them. Of course, China spies on the United States. We all spy on each other, everybody. But this brought it out in the open. And then China started to pass a lot of national security statutes to protect their national security, as they should. But those statutes also began to encompass lots of commercial interests to protect their industries, their companies. They took advantage of that. Now, we're doing much of the same. With our export controls, sanctions, et cetera. And in fact, actually about 1,000 entities are subject to U.S. export control provisions. It's large. And we're doing the same thing to some degree, protecting our industry, our chip industry, for example, other industries as well. So I think to some degree that's when it began. It's somewhat inevitable. Due to advances in technologies. It's somewhat inevitable because there's less travel among our countries. We don't know each other personally quite as much. And I think that trade issues have exacerbated it. Trump in his first term with his 301 tariff provisions, it didn't turn out too well. And then President Biden maintained those same tariffs, actually made it more difficult for China. And now here we are with Trump's second presidency. So we're stuck. National security is a huge, potent determinant of U.S. and China policy.
Thank you so much. Chung, do you want to weigh in on kind of what caused this change of heart?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's really intimidating with so many top-notch China watchers and practitioners in both the panel and also in the audience. Let me first make a distinction between security and the securitization. Security is a legitimate concern. I think that Zhu Feng and I study politics. We now talk about security as a high politics, and the trade, economy, education as low politics. So without high politics, the other things become not as essential. Now, but the problem is, exactly you said, that the securitization, everything through the lens. I agree with Ambassador Senator. I remember that time that I saw you before you came to China as ambassador. It started to emerge. There's a number of different reasons. There's no single reason. Some because of ignorance, some because of arrogance, some because of fear. I think probably fear carry more weight. Now, around the same time, the so-called Sicilian Trump with Graham Allison's book, although he now revisits that, he may have different thought. It's a very, very important, very influential book to see the emerging power and the existing power. So when you look at the existing power and the emerging power, of course, existing power become more fearful. So in that regard, that they particularly want to create a sense that China treat China as a new enemy. So when we talk about the new enemy, so the point is people in the business world said when the trade stops, the war will likely start. At the same time, the best things to demonize enemy, just create the enemy, just demonize the other. But the education provided just the other way to promote mutual understanding, mutual respect. So these should be gone before they lock down China as an enemy. But of course, this is only a small number of people, but unfortunately, they get a momentum, as you know so well, become now the prevailing view. But if it's a view, it's a perception, I still think it could change as time moves on. So I'm still optimistic. This kind of perception is man-made. When the environment change or the other party be smarter, probably we can challenge that perception in the years to come, but it takes some time.
Chung, thank you so much. And as we go to Stephen and also to Zhu Feng, let me add an element to the question that picks up on something that Chung just mentioned, and that is, to what degree do you think that the securitization, if you will, of the U.S. lens or approach to China is rooted in genuine and authentic concern about U.S. security versus the idea that it represents a politically expedient thing to do in the context of U.S. politics? And those are two different potential drivers. Stephen, I'm curious what your take is on that, and then Zhu Feng as well, please.
Thank you, David. I think that the political expedience, actually in both countries, is an important factor in, excuse me, in creating this fixation on national security. I actually think that we've taken the concept of national security too far in masking not just our concerns about others, but problems that we have not attended to ourselves. I think it's important to make the distinction, for example, between economic security and national security. You know, the new buzzword in Washington, even in China I've heard, is that economic security is now national security. And I think that's a cop-out. It means that, you know, if we have problems at home, we can put them under the umbrella of blaming them on others. And I'll just give you my favorite example. In the United States, the original sin of China is our gaping trade deficit. And so, you know, we have trade deficits right now with about, last year, 101 different countries. China is still the biggest, but it's a lot smaller than it used to be because of the tariffs that have been imposed on China. Trade deficits are more a function of our own macroeconomic problems in the United States, namely our low domestic savings driven by massive budget deficits, which will get even worse under the one big, beautiful tax bill that was enacted by President Trump and the Republicans earlier this year. And that tells me that, you know, irrespective of what we do on tariffs, you know, on one country or on a multiple of countries, that the trade deficits will continue to expand as they have since Trump first put the tariffs on in 2018 and 2019. It's expedient for us to blame China because we have not resolved our own budget and savings problem. To be fair, you know, China has used national security to blame the United States for policies aimed at all-around encirclement, containment, and restraint on the Chinese economy, to the point where a couple of years ago Xi Jinping stated that this was a serious issue in leading to China's growth problems. Again, it's an example of taking national security much too far. China's growth problems are largely problems of its own making. It's leaned too much on a producer model and not enough on a consumer model, too much supply, not enough demand, and I would say, with all due respect to my Chinese colleagues here at this meeting that the outcome of the fourth plenum, which is a prelude to what we can expect from the upcoming 15th five-year plan, will be more of the same. And it's a formula that we know very well in China, emphasizing industrial deepening, indigenous innovation, and oh, by the way, we'll give the consumer, a nod here, but rank it number 3 behind the first two. When you emphasize, again, the first two, that's supply. Number 3 is demand. And so by emphasizing supply over demand, China's still going to be an export-led growth model, and the world is going to push back on that and make it very difficult for China to grow. China's got a growth problem, not this year, not next year, but over the medium to longer term. And as long as it continues to rely on this formula and the excuse of using national security to guide and shape its economy, it's not going to get out of that trap. So in both cases, we've taken this concept. I mean, it's perfectly legitimate to worry about national security for defense purposes, but to then equate that with economic security is an example of a concept that has gone much, much too far, in my opinion.
Stephen, thanks so much. Feng, I'd like you to weigh on this before we turn to another topic.
Okay, from my perspective, securitization is just an accusation of American strategic pounding to China. From the first term Trump administration, it's the first time China was deeply locked into biggest strategic competitor to the United States. So therefore, what happened? It's not just a security concern from the U.S. to China. It's not just some sort of securitization, intervention. I mean, the American-China strategy is completely gone into the new realm. So then I have to say, behind the securitization, the real essence is Americans' strategic containment to China. But the problem is China-U.S. relations completely different from Soviet Union-U.S. relations. We are highly economically independent. Between the 2006 to 2023, China was #1 biggest source of exports to the U.S. So then I have to say, when the strategic definition of our relations completely changed and get into some sort of biggest competitor, that definitely means China is biggest enemy and the biggest threat. So then real essence behind the securitization is decoupling. Then yes, 2 years ago, the Biden administration also mentioned de-risk. But I also want to know what's make the real difference between the decoupling and the de-risk. So far, I have no idea at all, because even the American officials and the governmental members also haven't just offered any unambiguous answer. So that's why I have to say Chinese should just throw out any illusion. Securitization is a very soft, tactical description, but the real essence is Americans' post-China containment.
Thanks so much. I know that Chung wants to come in, and Ambassador, I believe you do as well. Chung, first.
Okay, yeah, I want to comment on my friend Steve Roach. If I understand correctly, you're basically saying that two countries both are problematic in terms of securitization. I disagree. I think they are not in the same level. Of course, early on I mentioned that the security concern is a legitimate concern. Everyone should concern with security. But it's the U.S. want to decouple with China. U.S. want to end the educational exchanges, at least the certain corners of the U.S., including October 2018, the White House team, political team, unanimously voted to end proposed to end the student exchange. And it's the U.S. becoming increasingly in confidence. Maybe you can say China become overconfident in recent years. But it's again, when it's an emerging power, the other is the country faces serious problem. The spread in numerous ways, in terms of bipartisan politics, in terms of racial tensions, in terms of ethnic, economic disparity, in terms of cultural war. Now, of course, China faces its own problem, but it's different in nature in the near future. And we probably expect in the near future, China will maintain continuity and stability. But we cannot claim, sadly, in the US in the near future. So I think we should put in at a different level, not to treat them as equal. Otherwise, we will miss really the problems, what's going on in today's world.
Ambassador?
I forgot to say how much politics in America is driving this problem. In the U.S. today, you cannot find a United States senator who will stand up on the Senate floor and say something constructive about the relationship. I'm not saying be obsequious or critical, just say something constructive on some small issue. Nobody will. No United States senator dares stand up on the floor of the United States Senate and say something constructive about the relationship. That's because it's so politicized. China is so politicized in America. For example, in my home state of Montana, we had a Senate race, and extremely expensive, about $350 million spent on that Senate race, $350 USD spent on a Senate race in the state of Montana. 2/3 of the ads were by one candidate claiming the other one's too soft on China. 2/3 of the ads, he's too soft on China. China is toxic in America today. It's toxic. You just very, very difficult to find some constructive dialogue or respect to China. Why has that happened? That's happened in part because, implication to your earlier question, it's partly political expediency, it's partly ignorance, but much of it is expediency because, don't forget, in America there are congressional elections every 2 years. That's a big factor, short term, huge. And it's a reality. We just have to deal with it. In addition, in America, many Americans think China wants to dominate the United States. Wants to be, if not the Asian hegemon, maybe even the world hegemon. China wants to dominate the United States. That's a very strong feeling in the United States today. On the other side, in China, there's a very strong feeling in China. U.S. is trying to slow China's rise. U.S. is trying, if not stop China's rise, slow China's rise. They're right. U.S. is trying to slow China's rise. There's no question about that. And that adds to the problem here. And my hope is that in South Korea, there's a bit of a recognition, hey, there are two peers now, U.S. and China. And that might create a little bit of realism, a little bit of sober. Each side might be sober a little bit toward the other. And Trump now has to realize he has to respect China with rare earths and so forth. And Xi is basically respecting the United States as well. My hope is that the tectonic plates almost shifted in Korea, with each country realizing, hopefully, it's a peer of the other, and neither can push the other around, neither can bully the other. If that's true, and if that recognition takes hold, then maybe we can start to deal with things that are important, and maybe start to realize that everything is not national security. Maybe we got to work on other matters. And that's a whole. I can give you a long list, but that's for another day. But I think that's where we are.
Thank you so much. Let me follow up by asking a question that I think relates to what all of you do. You're all affiliated with universities. We've got U.S. universities, we've got Chinese, mainland, Hong Kong, public, private. And we know that this notion of securitization has really seeped into the academic world very strongly. So my question to each of you, and maybe we can start with Stephen, and then we'll go to Ambassador Baucus, and then from a different perspective, look at the impact it's had on Chung and on Feng in terms of how Chinese universities deal with U.S. universities. But my question is, how has this securitization affected your organizations, your universities, your institutes? And To what degree is it coming from federal, or in the case, I would say, of Montana, from the state authorities? We've certainly seen this in Texas. And what is your sense of where this is going from a university standpoint? Let's start with Stephen, who represents Yale University.
Thank you, David. I just want to respond to one thing that Max said. I totally agree with him that there is not one single senator in the United States who would stand up for China, and I think that's a really good reason to have you run for office again. No. Just saw a no from his wife. Okay. Don't want to mess with that. I think to your point on securitization and its impact on universities, from my vantage point at Yale, having taught a large class on China for a number of years, and more recently having moved to a smaller China Center at the law school, I don't see a major impact on the security issue with respect to the instruction and discourse amongst the Yale community. I think people want to talk about it. We have national security courses dealing with U.S.-China issues. At one point, one of them was co-taught with a colleague of mine at the law school, along with Jake Sullivan, who went on to be National Security Advisor in the Biden administration. A lot of interest, but no major impact in limiting the intellectual curiosity on the topic, which is, I think, all you can ask for from the standpoint of a university. But I stand by my view that if, in the current climate in the United States, if you see an educational institution that takes a stance that is judged as against the grain of what the current administration preaches, they'll have a chilling impact on the nature of that program. And that's a tragedy for the United States, and a tragedy on the whole intellectual freedom of the university enterprise in the U.S. I haven't seen anyone penalized for doing that with respect to China-related issues yet, but I worry about that in the future.
Ambassador Walks, do you want to comment from a Montana perspective?
Well, very briefly, I want to go back to my earlier point about neither side trust the other. When I was serving as ambassador, I tried over and over and over again to get each side to address that issue. I would say to the Chinese side, don't just say, show that you're trying to do something. Show that you do not want to dominate the United States. Just do something to show it. Something. Just silence. Then I'd say the same thing on the West side. Show that we do not want to dominate China. Show it that we don't want to stop China's rise. Show it. Silence. But I just do think that each side has to address that point. Each has to show to the other that something that addresses the other's major concern. To your question, as you know, David, thank you very much. My wife Mel and I set up a program in Montana to help Montana college-age students get out of their comfort zone. We do that by sending them to different places all around the world, different positions, internships, and so forth. And we send groups to China, 2 groups of 20 each, 40 last year, and hope to do 60 this next year. We got a letter from that famous House Select Committee that we should not collaborate with the enemy. And long story short, the president of the University of Montana, bless his soul, stood up and said, I was in the Special Forces. I studied China. He was a wonderful man. He said, I know how important this relationship is. And he came to our assistance, and it died after that. But we were an institution that also received, complaint from that famous select committee. But For me, it's a badge of honor. Stand up, you bet. I'll take it on. If you want to criticize what we're doing, heck, I like that. That's publicity. That's for the relationship.
Thank you so much. Feng, I'd like to go to you because I know you've long had very deep engagement with the U.S. academic community, very well respected by so many of our colleagues in the United States. How has this securitization or this new lens that's affecting American universities affected you as you have engaged from the Nanjing University perspective with these U.S. counterpart organizations?
Okay, thank you, David. It's a very good question. My personal case is a very vivid saying on how securitization is very badly affecting, academic and the personnel relationship and the exchange between the two countries. Back to March of 2018, because I reject to cooperate with FBI agents, so my 10 years, multiple entry visa is very instantly just called off. It's not me again.
Result for many of us that have seen some very negative polling data. How does that potentially affect the U.S. federal government's and U.S. society's view in terms of China? Let's start with Zhu Feng, then we'll go to Stephen, and then Chung, and then Ambassador Baucus. And we've got about 4 minutes, so maybe about a minute each.
Okay, David, you mentioned a very interesting parallel. We also recognize the Chicago Foreign Policy Council's recent polling outcome is truly very encouraging. But the problem is, in what way you will be going up to the Washington, D.C. and very, visibly and also effectively affecting the Americans' elite politics, China mood, and the China psyche. But what worries me most for the time being is trade and tariff war between the two sides. The Busan Summit meeting just make it just periodically just terminate, but it doesn't mean we also come to any conclusion. So if the economic trading relations is truly going worse, I think the decoupling may be not far. That will be a big beat to our relations.
Thank you so much. Stephen.
Your premise is correct that there's no constituency in favor of re-engagement. It's a point that Max made as well with respect to the U.S. Senate. I would go further to say the following, that the old approach to managing our very complex relationship, largely based on leader-to-leader diplomacy, has now failed. And we have these glorious summit meetings, and we're sitting here talking the whole day about what happened in South Korea a few weeks ago. But I remember very well in 2017, we had two great summits, the dinner in Mar-a-Lago, the glorious dinner in the Forbidden City. Both presidents stood up and had their arms around each other, and the next year the tariff war began. This is not the way to run and manage a relationship. We need a new approach, and my time is just about up, so all I will say in a self-serving way is I'm writing a new book that is tentatively titled Conflict Resolution, and it'll be on your bookshelves, hopefully before Donald Trump is gone.
Thank you so much. Chung, maybe about a minute, and then Ambassador Baucus for about a minute.
Winston Churchill once said, Americans will do the right thing, but after trying all the wrong things. It will take some time, in my view, probably 10 to 15 years. But Donald Trump already did something very dramatic. And I think the Chinese will see him as a great opportunity, as a great asset in the bilateral relationship. I remember Dr. Kissinger once told me, he said the summit by the top leaders, the way they handle very different. Americans usually put on the issues, whether it be human rights issue, economic issue, South China Sea issue, Taiwan issue. Chinese are not interested in this specific issue, but they first and foremost, how you perceive me, whether as a friend, as a partner, as a rival or as an enemy. That makes a huge difference. But look at the U.S. presidents. I think Donald Trump is a leader. Love to use the word friendship. Friendship with China, friendship with Chinese top leaders. How could you lose that opportunity? I think next year will be a good year in U.S.-China relations because there may be 4 summits. Starting in April, Donald Trump visits China, then Xi Jinping visits the United States, of course, then the APEC, then G20. How could you go too long? Of course, I'm not naive, but that's the hope that we will enter.
That's a beautiful hope.
You are naive.
We're all hopeful. I think there's a basic truth in the first statistic you mentioned about the Chicago poll. That is that people are ahead of the politicians. People are pretty smart. They kind of know what's going on. And they want things to work better work well rather than not. Whereas the politicians, both countries, tend to whip things up, partly for their own political agenda, but also they're elected to try, they think, do the right thing. And I think that the good news is that basic stat that you just mentioned. How do we put this back together again? I see my time's up. I'll be very quick here. Number one, we should try to reach some agreements with China on certain issues. Just kind of get the ball rolling a little bit. We bring students. I bring students. That's one thing. Second, there are physicians and doctors in the United States who are trying to put together U.S.-China cooperation on cancer, on regulations and on R&D on cancer. I'm part of that, trying to help make that happen. Third, you might have read that article 2 or 3 more months ago by Thomas Friedman about U.S. and China are the only 2 countries that can do something about AI. At least start talking. Try to put some ethics into the algorithms. Just try. Just get things started. Try. Add to that, one idea I have is you know, CFIUS is a problem for Chinese companies going to America. We need something to try on the constructive side. When I was serving in Beijing, we had the bilateral investment treaty talks where we would agree, both countries, on what areas we could invest in. The Chinese really wanted that, and slowly that started to fall out. I think we should try to resurrect that. Some kind of talks on bilateral investment. Which areas could we, or green, in the larger sense, which areas can we really invest in and get that started?
We've reached the end of our panel. I want to thank our very distinguished panelists. Thank you so much. And I want to say one last thing. China cannot be all that it was meant to be without America. And America cannot be all that it was meant to be without China. We need each other. We have to get this right. And I'm really proud to fight alongside all of you and all of you in this room for the heart and soul of the U.S.-China relationship. We have to fight, we have to win, and we will win. Thank you so much.
So we thank our panelists and stay for the Defense Minister's masterclass coming right up. But we thank Professor Zhu Feng, our moderator David Firestein, Professor Li Cheng, Ambassador Max Borkus, and of course Professor Stephen Roach, who is writing a new book, he told us, and we in Hong Kong know that whenever Stephen Roach writes something, it gets a little exciting here. Whilst they're finishing taking the photographs, you remember from the morning high-level conversation, my last question was, what are the circles that India, China, and the United States can author together? And I took it for granted that Ambassador Rao would say the Silk Health Road that she had earlier proposed, but in the short interchange we had later, she had told me that the circles need to have reason. 1, to prevent incidents, be they at sea or on land. 2, to keep communications or to maintain communications. And 3, to avoid escalation through miscalculation. So prevent, maintain, avoid. Those are the purposes of the circle, not just talking about the circles in themselves. So thanks very much to our panelists and to Ambassador Rao for your interventions on that. Now is the masterclass that we've all been waiting for. The masterclass for the AI session is called Conflict to Cooperation, Security Pursuits, and the Path to Peace. Dr. Ng Eng Hen is an oncologist and longtime Minister for Defense who retired just earlier this year after 14 years in office. Singapore is, of course, not only a critical voice in the ASEAN region, but globally. And we're so delighted that Minister Ng is accompanied to Hong Kong by his wife, Professor Ivy Ng, who was head of Singapore's largest public healthcare group, and she'll be speaking at our next day off-record roundtables. But for now, Dr. Ng, Minister Ng, we're going to lean into your skills of precision as a politician, but also as a surgeon, as you look at how we can address what are some very complex and nuanced security challenges facing the world. Please welcome Minister Ng Eng Hen.
Thank you, President James Chow. And let me use this opportunity for myself and Ivy, my wife. Thank you and your fabulous team for this wonderful hospitality and organization. Let me also thank the board of directors of QCEF, Chairman Tung Chi Hua and John and Andy for this kind invitation. When you're out of office and you get invited, you start to question why, but I'll leave you to figure out why you get invited. But I think the last panel was excellent. I learned a lot from your views, and I completely agree with you. I mean, we have to encourage ourselves to continue this because, in the words of Winston Churchill, Jaw is better than war. Let me start my speech proper with another quote. J.W.F. Hegel, a 19th century German philosopher, famously said, "The real is rational, and the rational is real." Hegel's generation suffered tumultuous changes brought on by the French Revolution and subsequent Napoleonic Wars. Even so, Hegel accepted that change is a constant in mankind's progress. He termed this the dialectic process, driven by Geist, that human spirit, both individually and collectively as a society, which sought for greater freedoms and unmet aspirations. I submit that this present generation is also undergoing a dialectic moment in history, one that challenges the existing liberal world order, painstakingly constructed over the past 80 years post-World War II. As a consequence, the risk of severe disruption to our current global operating systems are growing as the rational pushes to become real. To illustrate, consider the words commonly used in the discourse of geopolitics previously: reaping the peace dividend, win-win, multilateralism, open trading systems, low or no tariff barriers, growing the global economic pie. It feels like a distant memory, but these phrases were common parlance only a few years ago, verbal touchstones that articulated our shared beliefs and motivations then. In their place, consider them the new lexicon of global conversations today. Many of you used the words in the sessions before this: strategic competition and allies, pacing threat, onshoring, friendshoring, decoupling, de-risking, trusted sources for supply chain resilience, build the walls, stop the boats. The purported contradictions and inadequacies driving our dialectic moment are of a mixed bag. They include the growing inequality in and across societies. The already rich people and societies are viewed to have benefited more from globalization, while the poor and even the middle class had to grapple with rising inflation, wage stagnation, and job insecurities. Locally, the populace views incumbent governments as unable or unwilling to deal with their difficulties and unmet expectations. Their lived experience consists of rising prices of homes, medical care, and daily essentials, loss of familiar surroundings due to uncontrolled migration, lost jobs due to outsourcing or migrants, to name some grievances. They view global institutions, many formed in the 60s and 70s, as antiquated, ineffective, or inadequate to deal with global crises, whether it was the global financial crisis, the COVID pandemic, or climate change. Countries, particularly within the global South and the Pacific Island nations, feel left behind and alone to deal with their growing existential threats. The backlash from these perceived inadequacies and shortcomings have soured the political ground in many countries. Trust in governments, the coin of the realm, as late US Secretary of State George Shultz reminded us, is in short supply. In that dyspeptic mood, political insurgents are able to tap upon these negative sentiments. Proponents of extreme positions, either the left or right, never mind their actual ability to solve problems, have garnered increasing political support. Conversely, established parties with centrist policies, especially incumbents, have lost ground. But parties or personalities that are elected on extreme positions need to make good on their promises to maintain that popular support. Their actions will change societies within and geopolitics without. This changing milieu has gathered greater momentum in the United States and Western Europe. In fact, judging from recent changes in American foreign trade and even domestic policies, one could argue convincingly that the United States is already in its post-dialectic moment, and that the same trends are now echoing through UK and Western Europe. The contest of ideas is between that of a continuing multilateral and inclusive rules-based order, one that breaks down barriers to preserve, grow, and enhance the global commons, requiring members at times to compromise individual needs for the greater overall good, or a competing system that puts each country's needs and internal problems foremost to be alleviated through leveraging others. In that latter paradigm, trade and security dependencies come at a price, to be determined between two countries and exacted based on relative needs, strength, and vulnerabilities. Dominant countries in that context speak and effect with greater weight. Simplified, this is essentially a contest between self-interest first and foremost against greater cooperation and unity. Who gets to decide the outcome in this contest that affects us all? The three largest protagonists by GDP and trade are US, 29 trillion, Europe, 28, China, 19. The US is the largest importer, China the largest exporter, and the EU in between for both. On heft alone, these three entities will have a major influence to shape and move the operating system to come. The middle countries, whether singly or of regions, United Kingdom, Japan, India, South Korea, Mercosur, ASEAN, have influence, but are around 3 to 4 trillion size economies. To impact changes, they will need consensus and partnerships, whether with each other and or the big three. Where these shifting tectonic plates in geopolitics settle on is still in flux, but their movements are unlikely to be transient or contained. We in Asia must and will be impacted too. It has already begun. Officials from China used to say to some of us in Asia, "You like to trade with China, but when it comes to security, you depend more on the United States." What they observe is a fact. China is the top trading partner for almost all countries in Asia. And it is also true that the military presence and relationship with the United States are the longer and for some the deeper one. Countries in Asia enjoyed this dichotomy, benefiting from both sides. But trade and security are two faces of the same coin. One inevitably follows the other. And if greater cooperation and strategic rivalry becomes the overriding consideration, not choosing or having the best of both worlds might no longer be tenable. If that happens, and each country positions itself for maximum leverage to sacrifice the preservation and functioning of the global commons, then I think we will all end up losers, small countries, middle and large ones included. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your time, Minister Ng. It's our honor to have you here with us today. And now we'll transition into another short break, so please grab some coffee or tea and we'll resume the program shortly. Thank you.
next session is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session is about to begin.
Hello everyone, if we can ask you to take your seats, we need to crack on with our next session. And we're going to get everyone seated. Find a seat. This is where we move now to our people to people. Instead of having a keynote, we are so lucky that we have a couple of international leaders in non-profit organizations who are going to lead this conversation, and we are going to welcome them up onto the stage now. Please welcome Neil Bush, Nicole Cruz, Shen Xin, and Andy Tong. And as they take their seats, allow me to briefly introduce them. Andy, who is our Vice Chairman of the China-United States Exchange Foundation. Andy, I forgot to brief you on this, but I'll do it right now. Moderator / speaker, so don't forget QSEF in this equation, please. But no, Andy, thanks so much for being here to moderate this. Andy, of course, is a career executive in airlines and shipping, and now focuses on investment and gives us so much of that knowledge and thought leadership in our work at QSEF, be it from dialogues to our scholars program and so on and so forth. We're really, really honored and always very, very happy when you can be with us. Nicole Cruz is the Vice President of the Carter Center, and I think, Nicole, you've been there for 35 years. Sorry, 25. I knew it was either 25, 15, 35. I went for the most experience and I hit wrong. Sorry, 25 years, so a quarter of a century. And Nicole, thank you very much to you and Paige Alexander and the Carter family for welcoming QSEF to the state funeral of President Jimmy Carter. This is, you know, this time last year we remembered him on our stage with Megan Martz, who is also here from Atlanta. And this is our first forum without President Carter here. So as much as we celebrate his life and legacy, we also remember this being the first year without him and, of course, the late Mrs. Carter before him as the co-founders of the extraordinary Carter Center. But that is why it's important that all partners step things up to ensure that their vision is actually carried through. So thank you very much to Nicole Cruz. I want to reserve very, very special mention for Mr. Shen Xin, who you heard from this morning in the keynote opening address as our co-organizer, Vice President of the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. I always take a breath after I say association because it's a very long name. And as I joked last night at our opening reception, we always thought QSEF was a long name at 11 syllables, but Friendship Association beats us at 17. But we're stronger together at 28 syllables. So Mr. Shen Xin, you know, I've been working with him for a couple of years, and what's been so extraordinary for all of us at QSEF is not only the ability to work with a historic organization that recently turned 70 years old, the oldest of its kind in the People's Republic of China, but the extraordinary people who have made things happen over there. And Mr. Shen, I don't think I know anyone apart from you and President Yang, who wanted to be here, and Mr. Tong, who love people to people in the way that you do, meaning culture, arts, the way people connect with each other. So we're really excited to have you on this panel. And of course, our dear friend Neil Bush, who I think with Stephen Roach is probably the other person who's been to every single US-China-Hong Kong forum since its inception by Mr. Tong in 2019. I remember that year in 2019, I introduced Neil Bush as the favorite son of Barbara Bush. And we all know this as well, the very special place, because that's why you've been chosen to carry on so many of your parents' legacies, including founder and chairman of the George H.W. Bush Foundation for US-China Relations. Andy Tong, thank you very much.
Okay, here we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us here. James, I don't dare, in front of this panel and in front of this audience, I don't dare talk about thought leadership. So it's a great group that we have here, so we're really looking forward to this. So thanks for joining this session, everyone. I hope and I trust that you've enjoyed all the prior sessions as much as I have. You know, I heard a lot of different thoughts and a lot of different words that I would just want to bring up. Particular speaker talked about the importance of teamwork, talked about heart-to-heart connections, you know, between people. We talked about building bridges. We talked about borders need to be kept open, but more importantly, minds need to be kept open. So these are some of the kind of words that I picked out from various speakers. And I think as we now migrate into this session, we're here really to talk about, the title is From the Ground Up, Strengthening U.S.-China Ties Through People. So we're really, really fortunate today to have three speakers who were introduced. Our three speakers, given they're all nonprofit leaders, so they'll be able to give us very, very good perspectives on how people-to-people engagement really help to transform relations and influence global cooperation through fostering mutual understanding, maybe reducing some stereotypes, reducing some typical comments maybe that may or may not be true, and hopefully really humanizing both sides. I think also I heard earlier today this talk about perhaps we're in a time now where, while it's been challenging for quite a while, in Busan, might it be the case that the two top leaders have actually kind of possibly set a tone and set a potential platform, for more positive type of development. We don't know yet, but I do think one comment was made, fine, you can set that tone, you can, the top leaders can do what they do, but at the end of the day, what gets done, who does it, how does this actually happen? So I think from the people-to-people side, from the grassroots side, I look forward to having this discussion with our panelists here. So maybe let me start with Neil. Okay. So President George H.W. Bush held the view that U.S.-China relations are very consequential, a very consequential bilateral relationship, and that a good relationship between these two countries is in the interest of both countries, really. So maybe if you can just give us a little bit of background about your foundation, and also, sort of what can we take away from Mr. George Bush Sr.'s leadership and his approach to diplomacy? Are there any sort of thoughts and lessons we can draw from that today?
Thank you. First of all, Andy, I want to say that how pleased I am that you personally are taking a big role at CUSIF. And I want you to please pass on our Bush family love and regards to your dad.
Thank you so much.
My dad was a great friend of your father's. Your father has been a mentor and someone who has left a deep impression on me, and I think everyone in this room has been influenced by him in a positive way. So please give him our love. I'd like to say that I'm so happy to share the platform with these two distinguished panelists. The Carter Center has done such fabulous work in helping promote understanding and better ties with U.S. and China, and they do so much more. And so I'm thrilled to be here with you, and have worked with Megan and Yahweh and the whole team in the past. And my father loved the People's Friendship Association. Madam Li Xiaolin became a little sister to me because she visited Maine all the time. She was hosting Mom and Dad when they come to China, and we're deeply appreciative of the great work you do in helping to promote U.S.-China relations. My father had a very, I think, kind of maybe old school approach of putting himself in the shoes of others, to establish understanding and trust. When he was appointed as the liaison officer in 1975, representing China during the end of the Cultural Revolution, he didn't sit in his office. He went out and rode bikes with the people, got to know people that were in leadership positions at that time. He became, among other things later on in his career, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. When China was admitted, Taiwanese were kicked out. We were promoting at that time a two-China policy for representation in the UN. First thing my father did was to welcome the Chinese delegation at a dinner in Greenwich, Connecticut, hosted by my grandmother. So it was the personal touch. You know, it was a very humane and wonderful way to send a signal that we're working for the betterment of mankind in all ways. He became president. The first trip he made was to China. The first crisis he dealt with was Tiananmen Square. A lot of presidents might have handled it differently. My father kept the relationship on track with, you know, personal diplomacy with Brent Scowcroft and personal notes to Deng Xiaoping, and so that helped set the platform and the framework for rapid growth. My father understood, by the way, that our bilateral trade ties, our bilateral ties, and the global order that was established had helped to make the United States the strongest, greatest, most powerful nation on the face of the planet by any measure, whether economic or military. Our influence has been dominant, and he understood that this relationship with China helped to make us that way. And I think he was probably pretty proud and to accept some credit for the great advances that China has made in the meantime. So I hope history will reflect well that there had been a win-win global order that was established, and I think he's rolling around probably up in heaven, you know, worrying now about the disruption of this global order. We were at full employment, you know, when the concept of tariffs, you know, to create more jobs in America. We don't need more jobs. We're at full employment. Why do you need more jobs? You know, to disrupt the supply chain situation, to like break the engine that made us so strong and great, he would be very disturbed by. I guess to answer your question, I'm sorry I've rattled on, you know, personal relationships. He believed in people to people. He hosted a conference in his post-presidency, and that was the basis on which I, with his help, formed the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations, which is so ably run by David Firestein. And we are so proud of our collaboration, by the way, with CUSIF, and we look forward to working with you going forward to help, you know, normalize our relationship and to help continue it on a track where it could be, once again, okay to be win-win.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me just share one quick story. Back in the day, when I was running our family's shipping company, we had a ship, and we named it OOCL Texas. And knowing my father's relationship, he said, "Oh, would we be able to get Mr. and Mrs. Bush, you know, to come and name the ship?" And so they very, very kindly came to Shanghai and actually named the ship for us. So really very wonderful, long-time relationship. Thank you so much, Neil. Next, maybe let me turn to Mr. Shen Xing. And James, I think I'm just going to say CPAFFC. It's a little shorter. So, you know, President Xi announced this goal of inviting 50,000 young Americans to China over 5 years for exchange and study. And for 70 years, the Friendship Association has worked to keep those channels open, welcoming American students, supporting initiatives like the Kuliang Dialogue, and I think recently the China-US Youth Choir Festival, where there were 30 choirs, maybe 1,000 singers from both the US and China, gathering in Fuzhou and Beijing. And so through these events, you know, really fostering connections between these two societies. So maybe can you share some of your experiences on how events like this have helped to contribute to people-to-people exchange?
Okay, first of all, I would like to say I'm very honored to have, you know, two panelists with me, Neil and Nico. Actually, as Neil said, the Friendship Association, actually we can call ourselves Friendship Association. It's much, much shorter, you know what I mean? The Friendship Association has a very long-term relationship with the Bush family. Actually, I still have the vivid memory accompanying your father since the year of 1997. Yeah. So since then, every time your father was in China, actually, I served as an escort or translator for him. So I'm really happy to see you again. And with Carter Center, our association co-hosted a symposium on China-U.S. relationship since this year. Actually, we are going to turn it into an annual event. So also I can make an advertisement here. So welcome everyone here, to participate in our symposium co-hosted with Carter Center. Return to the question, since the initiative was put forward in the year of 2023 by President Xi, this initiative has been warm welcomed in both Chinese and American side. As I told you this morning, more than 30,000 American young people have visited China in the last 2 years. And I think the most important role those young people are playing is to bring a very friendly messages back to the American people. Through them, American people can find that Chinese people actually are very warm, welcoming to the American people. And the friendship between the two peoples are quite realistic, quite true. It's totally against those reports in the Western media, So the message sent by those American young people are very important. And also, I think the trip made by those American young people changed their preconceived image in their minds on China or even on the world at large. So this is very important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me get to Nicole. President Carter normalized relations in 1979, which really began an era of exchange between the U.S. and China and enabled mutual benefits and period of prosperity that lasted quite a long time. So maybe can you tell us a little bit more about the work of the Carter Center, and particularly the program under the China Focus, and what lessons can we draw from the work that you guys have been doing?
Thank you so much, Andy. And I just want to thank you and James and QSEF for including us in this important conference and being part of this distinguished panel. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My understanding is that President Carter's interest in China happened actually much earlier in his life. As a 6-year-old boy, he was inspired by the stories of his uncle, who was a naval officer, and who had sent him stories as well as a model Chinese ship, which still is in Plains, Georgia, in the Boyhood farm there, and you can see that ship on display. So his interest in China certainly was throughout his life. In 1981, when he left the White House, he made his first post-presidency trip to China, where he succeeded in making 13 trips after that. He really understood the importance of people-to-people connections, meeting people where they are, fostering mutual understanding, and looking for opportunities to better understand each other. So throughout his life, China was a strong interest of his. And he and Mrs. Carter, when they left the White House, they established the Carter Center, which was to work on peace and health. So our motto is that we wage peace, we fight disease, and we build health. We have 2 portfolios of programs that we undertake. On the peace side, we work on conflict resolution, democracy, human rights, and rule of law. And the China program works to bridge those ties between the Americans and the Chinese and to foster U.S.-Chinese relations. We do that through a forum, the Jimmy Carter Forum on U.S.-China relations. We also support youth, young PhD students in exchange of ideas. And we also have a digital platform that looks at perceptions between the Chinese and the Americans called the U.S.-China Perception Monitor. So those are the ways that we continue his legacy to foster and support U.S.-China relations. The Carter Center also has major programs in global health. We work in the area of neglected tropical diseases, fighting diseases like guinea worm disease, lymphatic filariasis, schistosomiasis. These are diseases that affect the most marginalized people in the world. And we have a portfolio that was dear to Mrs. Carter, working on mental health and caregiving as well. The Carter Center has more than 3,000 employees around the world, and we're carrying out the work of peace and health throughout the world.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So let me ask this question. You know, we've heard throughout the previous sessions that you know, times are challenging, and I think I was quite surprised to hear, I think, David Firestein talking about sort of the law in Texas, which, you know, it very directly, you know, puts a serious challenge on even the most sort of basic level of people-to-people exchange. So, but putting that, you know, rather extreme example aside, I mean, just generally, you know, when the world is not running smoothly, let's just say, I wonder if you can share some of your experiences of, you know, what do you do? What do you need to do differently in this kind of circumstance? And maybe, I was thinking maybe, let me start with Mr. Shen. Just given the Friendship Association's kind of long history, and you deal with so many countries, and I'm guessing that inevitably there are situations with different countries, you know, you run into different types of pressure. In this kind of circumstance, how do you go about your work?
Yeah, we do see a lot of challenges in launching programs, people-to-people exchanges with the United States. But of course, we don't complain on that. It's the reality. It's the real issue we have to deal with. So what we believe is that with so many friends and partners in the United States which share the same mission with us, we can figure out some ways to do that. For example, we design some interesting programs to young people, no matter it's choir group or for sports events or art exchanges or medical dialogues that. So those programs actually fit for the tastes of young people. They meet the requirements for dialogues between younger generations. So in this way, I believe no matter how strong the headwind is, we can find enough young people from both China and the United States to join in this program. Then through their words, through their experiences in China, we can attract more to participating. Also, I'd like to say we're very happy to partner with QSAF. Actually, you sent so many university delegations in the past several years to China. We're very happy to host some of them and have very good dialogues with them. So during the dialogues with them, actually, we introduce what we do in the past years and also attract them to participate in our future programs. So we don't believe, you know, a goal can be achieved in a quick way. We believe our step-by-step work, our gradual but continuous efforts will finally reap some benefits or products. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Neil or Nicole, any comments?
I'll just share. You know, the Carter Center really does try to build hope, and hope is so important today. We are unique in that we have peace and health programs that are mutually reinforcing. And you can't have peace without good health, and you can't have good health without peace. And we're looking at opportunities to try to do more at the intersection of peace and health. And there's a lot of hope around what that means. So the Carter Center has been successful in carrying out programs that bring in our peace experts to help resolve conflicts so that our health experts can get in and address problems that affect the most marginalized in the world. And so I think we can do more at that intersection of peace and health together.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to switch topics a little bit, or put on a different hat.
Sure.
I'm not just a nonprofit guy.
Sure.
I spend very little time. David does all the heavy lifting for the Bush Foundation. I'm a businessman, and I think it's pretty imperative that we have more interaction between, you know, government leaders. So let's give credit for the presidents meeting. The more they meet, the more they'll have better understandings, the lower the tension we'll get, and hopefully the more normalized the relationship will look and the less fearful Americans will be of China. We need more minister to minister. We need more student exchanges. We need more exchanges on all fronts, cultural and all fronts, including business. And in fact, the business relationships that exist today from after 40 years of development, the roots of those relationships are so deeply embedded. American companies doing business in China, American companies buying stuff from China, Chinese companies participating on the U.S. stock exchanges. You know, there's a deeply rooted relationship, and that's I think going to be kind of the ballast for the relationship going forward. So I'll give you one example of a collaboration that I've participated in. There are many areas of low-hanging fruit for business cooperation. One is climate. So I've been working with an American company that has an interesting storage technology. It's never been built on a commercial scale. We brought a Chinese partner in to invest in the U.S. company. They also bought an exclusive license, and now they've spent over $100 million building this gravity-based storage solution in the renewable business in Rudong, China. So it's a great example of an area where there's fewer barriers to collaboration, climate, where U.S. technology and know-how and intellectual property is being implemented by Chinese that happen to be pretty good at building stuff and doing it at scale. And so I'm not as discouraged, I think, as many of you are, that there can be no more business done there, because whether it's climate, food security, aging, you know, there are so many areas, health-related things, where there are collaborations, there need to be more collaborations, and those walls, you know, need to be broken down.
Very good, thank you. So I pick up, again, like 3 words from this. Well, 4 words. Long-term, hope, and deeply rooted. And I think these are all, to me, highlights this people-to-people relationship. It takes time, but if you do it right and you're persistent and persevere, the roots can be very deep. And that's, at the end of the day, I think what CUSIF is really, really passionate about, and I'm sure, you know, everyone on the panel here is very, very passionate about. Maybe let me just finish off. You know, Neil, you mentioned a bunch of areas, you know, different, you know, we've heard this morning, you know, we're talking quite a bit about technology and AI, but you mentioned, you know, climate, there's sort of demand on energy, there's aging, you know, there's all sorts of issues. Let me start with Nicole. The disease eradication is something that the Carter Center has really been focused on. Maybe share just a little bit more about that with us?
Yes, I'd love to just tell you a little bit about our Guinea worm eradication program.
Please.
The Carter Center has led the global effort to eradicate this ancient disease. It's a parasitic disease. It will be the second disease to be eradicated from humankind. The first was smallpox. And when we started the campaign to eradicate guinea worm disease, there were 3.5 million cases worldwide. There are 4 cases today. Only 4 cases. Just the disease could not have been eliminated so far without a coalition of partners. It really, truly is a partnership. And CUSEF has joined that coalition of partners, and we're very grateful for that. The Chinese government earlier this year was one of the co-sponsors of the World Health Assembly resolution on the eradication of guinea worm disease, which was later adopted by the 194 member states of the World Health Organization. So we know that it takes a coalition of partners to do great things in the area of global health. And I think that's an opportunity for collaboration and cooperation going forward. And you can see the success that we've had leading this effort with our partners to eradicate an ancient disease.
Right, wonderful. That's an excellent story. I mean, the results are amazing, but also the point about the importance of collaboration, you know, across the borders. So I think I've just about used up all my time. So thank you very much to the panelists. Please give another round of applause.
Panelists, please stay on stage for a group photo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tung, Mr. Bush, Mr. Shen, and Ms. Cruz. We'll now be moving into our Minds and Media panel, where we'll look at how ties are not only strengthened through people, but how creators and scholars and nonprofit leaders are changing the way we forge connections across cultures, particularly through digital platforms. Ms. Ruby Yang will be moderating this panel. She is an Academy Award winner and now the director of the HKU School of Future Media. And panelists will include Dong Qiang, Dean of Yenching Academy at Peking University, as well as Kyle Oberman, who is a filmmaker and a nature host of our digital platform, The China Current, Nini Suet, who is a board trustee of Tabor Academy and an international governor of Blair Academy, as well as Zhou Shuang, who is the artistic director of the Beijing Music Festival. So you all may come up on stage now and please sit under your photo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us at this session, and welcome panelists. Thank you for joining this panel about media and soft power, which is very crucial nowadays. I think it does a lot to the image of both China and the US. Well, I was actually went to school in the US in the late 70s and got my work experience in the US, and then went to China and then now in Hong Kong. So from my own experience, I know how media has such a strong influence on people's mind. And I remember my fellow Asian Americans or Chinese American, they were all very underrepresented in the media. In the 70s especially, the only TV celebrity or TV anchor is Connie Chung. And that's the representative. And also, everyone in the media, in movies, they only know Bruce Lee. And that's about our hero or role model. And so there was a big problem for the Asian American, Chinese American, because they don't have a role model to look onto. And that time, it was, of course, before, right after U.S.-China being open, and there's very little connection between China and U.S. So, of course, fast forward now, it's totally different nowadays, 40 years ahead. Things have changed a lot with social media, we now have TikTok, we have Red Note, which has a lot of influence on how Chinese are being represented in the media. And we have lots of great Chinese movies shown in Hollywood. And, and also things have changed a lot, both in movie and media, movies, and social media. So I want to start with the question. Well, so with the Red Note TikTok become cultural crossroad where billions of people meet through creativity, how do you think the culture has changed and how would they learn from each other? Should we have each panelist say something?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and especially the organizer. I'm new in this field because I was a specialist of France, and talking about culture, it was very natural, easy. But I think since I'm Dean of Yanqing Academy, a lot of things changed. I think I'm in a new context, and for subtle things, I prefer speak Chinese, with your permission, because I think as we talk about Sino-America relations, in Sino we have Chinese, in Chinese we have the Chinese language. So I think we are in Hong Kong. With your permission, I will speak in Chinese. Maybe I can better answer the question. 软实力soft power， 现在提这个词啊，有点奇怪了。我前一阵子邀请了一个法国前总理拉法兰先生 ，Mr. 哈法汉，他也是我们燕京学堂的这个讲席教授。我给他一个题目，就是讲讲，因为他很热爱中国，我说你讲讲这个对中国的这个文化软实力的理解。当我给他这个题目的时候，我就很犹豫。我突然发现这个词好像已经有好久没有人用了，或者是这个词好像已经有点过时了。然后我就问自己问题，我奇怪，后来我还是坚持用了这个词。因为我觉得这个词还是依然是有用的，跟我们这个时代还是联系在一起的。你提到了这个，比方说 TikTok 这样的这个一种新的媒介的产生确实使得在年轻人在接受一个所谓的他者的时候他跟以前的传统方式不一样了。但是这种分散的信息能否让一个人形成一个比较完整的对一个国家的比较精准的，或者是相对来说比较准确的这样一种认识呢？我本人我现在还看不出来我想这个问题大家都是最关注的一个问题。我近期参加了另外一个论坛，我遇到了一个全球第3大媒体集团的老总，他底下就既包括很多电视台报纸 又包括一个全球第3大的出版集团。他在跟我讲的时候，他就跟我说，他说我作为总裁，给我自己的目标就是要把它办成全球第1大的出版集团。我就很惊讶，我说现在全是 TikTok， 越来越少的人读书了，你为什么还要把这个作为你的一个重要的？他就跟我说 ，Professor， 他说事情都是辩证的。他说你看嘛，随着这种 TikTok 这种东西的发展，人们会越来越需要回归阅读，越来越需要去读书等等。这个对我来说是一个巨大的一个鼓舞，因为我是一个大学教授，我对外界很多事情我不知道。他作为一个现在任的一个总裁，他认为出版业是他的重头，书籍依然有未来。那么我想这个就跟我们要讨论的事情非常连在一起了，就是说真正的软实力它是存在的，就是通过一种国际教育，通过留学生。你看我们现在在燕京学堂，我当院长以后，我举办了很多好像跟这个没有直接关系的，跟他们的学科没有直接关系的，但是我们北京大学是博雅、通识是有传统的100多年传统。那么我就希望他们能够有一种更广的视野，在一种文化艺术。你看我邀请了全世界最有名的一些电影明星这个 Juliette Binoche for example 然后呢这个演莎士比亚和汤显祖同台去进行对话。我当时很感动，这个外国的留学生跟我说，这是我第一次从头到尾看了一个中国的戏曲。那么你总得有第一次吧，你通过 TikTok 你是看不全《牡丹亭》的，你只看到2分钟的《牡丹亭》，你只看到其中一小段。我们都知道《牡丹亭》有个著名的一段，在任何场合都是那一段。那么这种对文化的理解是非常肤浅的，而且这种肤浅化是会毁坏文化、毁掉文化的。假装好像它存在，它其实就跟不存在一样。甚至由于它是这种表面的存在，使得人们对这个真正的文化的追求反而被忘记了，等等。所以呢，我觉得简单来说，我个人觉得今天我们探讨了像 AI 探讨你这新的媒体方式，这种新的方式呢，都是重大的问题。那么，尤其在这种重大问题的环境之下，在大学里面，在国际教育上强调人文、强调艺术，我觉得是变得越来越重要，而且呢，能够成为年轻人互相真正能够打破一些可以说是思想障碍、文化障碍的一个重要手段。当莎士比亚能够跟汤显祖开始对话的时候，其实一个美国学生和英国学生跟一个中国学生已经在心灵上进行沟通了，而且他们会意识到这是一种全人类的文化。其实我们当今这个时代的一个危机之一，就是全人类的文化，我们现在怎么去保护它，怎么去继承它，怎么通过教育再传下去。否则的话，如果纯粹是高科技的，或者是这种这个 TikTok 带来的，或者是 AI 带来的，那我想人的这种人性的一些重要东西就没了，好吧？我想我们教育是要传承这种人性的东西的。谢谢。
Thank you. That's well spoken.
So I agree with Dongqiang that I hope more people read as well. But I think I have a different viewpoint about how soft power and social media interact. One, I think that let's look at Korea, let's look at K-pop. They are some of the most popular, let's say, East Asian culture right now. And that's not because it was taught in schools. That's because there were TikTok dances to K-pop songs. It wasn't because people were trying to deeply understand a culture. It was because there was an emotional connection, a curiosity at a very low level, and then people decided, oh, now I want to go to Korea, now I want to study. And I think that's how culture spreads. And so what I worry about is actually just the firewall. There is TikTok, but there's also Douyin. And the entire world, besides China, is connecting on TikTok, but leaving China inside of its own bubble in Douyin. The same can be said for Xiaohongshu or RedNote, right? There was this watershed moment in January of this year where people thought that TikTok was going to be banned, and 3 million Americans per day started to get on RedNote. And it was an incredible moment. It was like Clubhouse during the pandemic. If you remember, it's gone. But when Americans and Chinese were talking to each other on RedNote, they were sharing cat pictures, culture. It was amazing because now they're on a Chinese app inside the wall. But it didn't last. Why didn't it last? One, TikTok's still here. Two, I don't think that China wanted that many foreigners on RedNote. And you can see that because, one, on RedNote, it's incredibly hard to monetize your following if you're a foreigner and you don't have a Chinese bank account and you don't have a company. It's impossible. They could have changed that, but they didn't. Two, in 2023, the RedNote CEO came to New York in sweatpants and held roundtable discussions with young people, with his staff, kind of undercover. And I only know this because I was part of that, and I didn't know what he looked like. And after the meeting, I learned I met with the CEO. And they were investigating launching a whole new entire app in the United States. So I think that, honestly, I think this is a problem for China. I think that while China sees this firewall as a way to protect itself, it's also not letting itself out. And China right now, this is not 1990, this is not 2000, this is not even 2010. There are so many great things. I think Sheng Xin, at the beginning of today, he said when American students go to China, they all say how cool, amazing it is, right? There are so many really amazing things that honestly Chinese creators should be allowed to share with the West, not white people who speak Chinese. And there is just so much content out there, but I worry that because of maybe a conservatism and a fear of allowing information to go both ways, that this firewall is restricting it. So I don't see that RedNote and TikTok are joining our two countries together. I think it's joining the rest of the world and maybe alienating China a little bit, but I wish it was the other way.
Thank you. So honored to be here. I absolutely agree with both of you, what you said. Coming from the classical music festival background, first of all, classical music, it's a special platform because it has its own snobbery and challenges. When I was back in my early days, I was in the UK working in the opera. And I remember hearing this term, opera for everybody. And I once had a conversation with the founder of English National Opera, Lord Howard, and he held my hand, just before he passed away, he held my hand and really, really passionately said, opera is for everybody. And then I was a little bit questioning in my head, everybody meaning I'm Chinese or everybody meaning I'm young? So at that time, I got the invitation from our former artistic director, the chairman now of the Beijing Music Festival, Maestro Long Yu, to come back and run the festival on his behalf. And I realized, wow, there is a real mixture of audience in China for classical music. It's actually a much younger generation, but it has a very strong adherence to the belief that the West is the standard, the West is the criteria. So in the very early days of the festival, we achieved many the world premieres of The Ring, for example, and many co-productions with European houses and all of that. But in the new generation audience, I think when I started to take over, I discovered, okay, the opportunity is to find a new digital platform for interactions and for sharing emotion responses from what you have seen and what you're going to see, and to cultivate an audience that's truly younger. And this doesn't mean just by age, but by people who actually carries that curiosity to use culture and sharing of music to be able to share their real emotional response, under the cultural umbrella. I grew up in a very fortunate generation, I must say, that as a young singer, I went to America many times with a Chinese choir, and also participated in some ice-breaking tour of some performances to Taiwan, for example, early 90s. And I remember that time I didn't quite understand what it means to icebreak. But I guess it's a really good time now. We have so many digital platforms, as well as the curiosity and the passionate international collaborators in the platform of classical music category to share what they know and to be daring to laugh and to disagree, you know, to create something that can subtly generate what we can call soft power. And I really look forward to work with more and more like international artists, as well as generating our digital platform internationally to share our content and also to bringing more to share with the Chinese audience.
Thank you, Ruby, and fellow panelists. So coming from an education background, I work with a lot of young people for the past 12 years. And I feel like when it comes to TikTok, Rednote, all the social media, it's a part of their lives. We sit here and we talk about, oh, what should we do? And the kids are probably like, we're born with it. And then, to be honest, there's no way of blocking. If they want to share things, they share things, right? So no matter what kind of interventions you have, they share what they share, they read what they read, they swipe what they swipe. That's a part of their life already. So I feel like in terms of schools too and education, it's more important to focus on, how do we make sure that they're using these social media or technology in a way that's beneficial for their minds. And when you're young, it's very difficult to know, and it's very easy to just get swept up in the swiping. So in some of the schools that at Tabor and some of the boarding schools that we work with in the U.S., very interesting. There are a lot of the educators are talking about a book that's written by Jonathan Haidt. It's called The Anxious Generation. If you guys read it, especially parents read it, you really freak out because you're like, oh my God, it's very scary what social media or these technology could be doing for these teenagers' brain as they're developing. So a lot of schools in recent years have been actually banning the phone during academic days. So your phone's actually going to like a phone hotel or a phone prison, and then when you're actually in school, and then you only get it maybe at 6 p.m. So that's actually ongoing right now in a lot of the schools, and it's interesting. I don't know what the impact will be, but that's happening. And I'm talking about that is because for these young minds, right, when they form and shape, and social media is an integral part of their lives, it's more important for us to think of what can we do to make sure that they're using it in the, I guess, in a way that's beneficial to growing critical mind, as opposed to being led by technology, as opposed to being enslaved by technology. You should be using it as tools, right? So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anybody has any answers to that, but I think that's something worthy of discussion. Yeah.
Thank you for the answer. Well, at Hong Kong U, we're pushing for a lot of AI, and I think AI is very important, and we just got the approval for the School of Future Media, which focus a bit on AI. We have basically three divisions. We have our journalism, which is very important, how we tell story, how we tell facts into the world about the truth. And then we have AI and filmmaking, and then we have global creative industry, which all related to media. And I think I totally agree with Dean that we have to focus on humanity and the people-to-people connection, because with just AI, and then young people would just look at the computer without really connecting with people. Going to a real performance, going to a movies, is very different because you have a community. You have people share the same experience with you. I think it's so important because the previous panelists already discussed about connection. It's so important that we have people-to-people connection. We bring students to China. We have students going to the US. That makes a huge difference. So even with Zoom, we still have it's different when you see the full body interaction is very different. So I want to ask Dean that what would you do, what are you doing with the Yinchan Academy? And so are you preparing the future generation, what is your narrative for this China-U.S. relationship?
Can I still continue with Chinese? Yeah. So, 我觉得我去过当了学堂的院长以后，去过几次美国啊。首先呢，我感觉到有一个让我比较震惊的，就是美国的年轻人，包括一些大学生，对中国的问题的可以说是表示出一定的冷淡和漠然。我参加过在哈佛大学这个举办的这个中国论坛，我当时很激动，这是我第一次在这么重要的美国大学亮相，我做了一个 keynote speech， 但是我注意到台下几乎没有什么真正的美国学生，很多都是来自于其他国家的，下面基本上我真的很震惊，就是我在美国的哈佛大学里边，在下面一个重要的关于中国的论坛上看到的美国学生，还不如我在燕京学堂看到的美国学生多。对我来说，这是个震惊。所以呢，我觉得我们有一种迫切的需要，这种文化之间的交流。然后呢，一定要打破的是一种陌生性。什么东西变得陌生了，就可怕了。我们中国文化的一大特点，尤其是中国现代文化的一大特点，就是我们的现代文化从一开始就是关注西方的。这点我是不断地跟我们学生强调，千万不要以为中国有一种什么与众不同的、极其陌生的中国性。中国的现代的起源是跟发现西方是同时的。正是因为发现了西方，激发了中国的起源，所以呢，巨大的这个可以说是对这个西方文化的关注，促进了中国的发展，包括促进了邓小平时代的改革开放，包括促进了今天的中国的发展。在中国从来没有过摒弃过真正的摒弃西方，我们都是双重文化的一种产物，这个是非常重要的。所以呢，只有在这种情况下，让学生来到我们中国，他才能够真正的感受到，原来中国人是如此的开放和现代。我们是有一种开放性和现代性的。所以呢，你刚才因为时间关系，我觉得我要强调的就是这个。一方面，你来了以后感受我们中国肯定有我们中国独特的地方，中国的文化、中国传统，但同时也希望能够看到我们在这个中国的现代文化当中与生俱来的一种开放性。中西文化在我们现代性当中是并存的。中国从来都不是一个封闭的，真正在文化上封闭的国家，或者是曾经可能封闭过，但是呢，现代中国并不封闭。所以这一点我是需要通过各种各样的，无论是课程还是一些活动那么就举一个小例子，当我们燕京学堂举办了一个肖邦钢琴之夜的时候，我们的学生又一次惊讶了，他没想到中国人能够对这种钢琴、对肖邦的音乐这么了解。他自己在自己国家，他以为自己好像是本来就是小众，他到中国来一看，学生这么多，整个而且学堂之外，北大那么多学生老师来听一个。所以呢，我们这种开放性，我觉得是我们中国的一个特点也是我们中国的一个潜力，也是中国的一种力量。所以呢，我希望这样一种力量呢，是一种文化的力量，也是一种和平的力量。谢谢。
Well, I think media is very important. Well, as our journalism media study, now part of the media School of Future Media, we train journalists to tell a story. It has to be factual. And right now, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about China. When we try to invite journalists or teachers to come over to Hong Kong, and they are afraid, they said, is it still safe to travel to Hong Kong? So there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think what is important is that we have to train good journalists and storytellers that tells the good story, a balanced, three-dimensional way of telling the Chinese story, the Asian story, Chinese story, because that's so important, because they only look at the narrative written by the Western media, which is very one-sided. Many of them are very one-sided. So I think we need to really break that, but that's tough. It would take probably another couple years or decade to do that. So I would ask Hai, you are a filmmaker. What do you have suggestion for, covering China in a different light, or tell a more nuanced story about China? What do you have suggestions?
Well, I think that the best, films or, let's say, articles, books, photo essays I've seen about China always include a very relatable human story and human angle. And, I think that really highlights, again, we've talked about this so much today, but we all share the same stories. Going back to, Jonathan Haidt, he's an amazing social psychologist, and he wrote a great book about the United States and the difference of thinkings of Republicans and Democrats. And, but between China and the US, we all want our families to be safe. We all want a good job. We all have hopes and dreams. And so I think that the human stories, for me, it's mostly conservation focused. It's rangers outside in the wild. But those are going to be the stories that kind of ignite the spark, and then can be larger allegories for the rest of China. I think a really good filmmaker will use a small story, bring you into the details, and that is a larger symbolism that allows you to experience a greater whole. And Ruby, right back to you, I know you're an Academy Award-winning filmmaker as well, so as someone with a lot of experience, I want to ask that question right back to you. What kind of films about China do you think have been most effective?
Well, documentary is hard. I think that people like to enjoy nature story a lot more. But I think for feature films, there's a lot of room to tell really nuisance story. And unfortunately, for entertainment, they love only, action movie. And last year we have Michelle Yeoh, Everything Everywhere All at Once. So that's more like a entertainment story. And I believe in the early days, like in the 90s, we have very good films from China. Zhang Yimou's film was very loved by a lot of audience, mature audience, and we have also An Li. He tells a very human story, and that's really also loved by a more mature student. Mature audience. But nowadays, young people are interested in short story, 2 minutes. That's a tough one. I think that we need to grab that. We need to grapple how we should tell story, short story or short drama, into telling a more rounded story. That's tough because in 2 minutes, how can you tell a very in-depth story? But that's the trend. So I would say Korea has a very successful doing the popular culture with K-pop. I think in China we can do probably the same because we have a depth of mythical stories. We have Monkey King, we have all these really beautiful mythical story that we can also maybe tell it into a more multinational way, more accepted by a Western culture. With AI, of course, we can recreate a lot of stuff that could be in multiple languages. Now a lot of the short narrative is dubbed into different languages. I think we should persuade the leaders or the head of the company not to look at too much making money, entertainment. We have to look in depth about telling story more about humanities, right? I think that's the thing. So I would go through with all the opera, all these mythical stories. How would you bring to make it to Western audience, make it more friendly, and so attracting more U.S. audience to the opera? Right now you are doing more Western opera. Should be the other way.
Yes. In the context of opera, obviously there are old content, old classical operas. In our festival, we decided to look for the niche category of operas of the Baroque opera as well as the contemporary opera, because we believe that in these two extreme end of the periods, we can find a narrative that can tell a global story. For example, we collaborated with the Théâtre de la Monnaie in Brussels. We made co-produced an opera that is Handel's Semele, but we worked with a Chinese contemporary artist who actually just tailed down a whole ancient house from Jiangsu province and put it on the stage of the Brussels Opera House. And then he even brought the sweeper from that house to perform on stage with all the Western singers. And they were just not only dressed up as Chinese ancient styles to sing a Baroque opera for the Belgian Opera House, but actually when we brought it the other way, Chinese audience also found this is something from the West. There's some nuance that's shared in the middle. So that's like the crossroad meeting West and East kind of story. But recently, with the support kindly also from KUSIF, we have presented this new co-produced project between our festival and Lincoln Center. This is a storytelling sort of music theater piece based on an idea of future tradition. So we have a slogan, future tradition. What does that mean? We want to take the tradition to the future, but we want to use the futuristic way to represent our tradition. So we invited the Pulitzer Prize winner, Chinese composer, Du Yun, who is a wonderful woman composer, to go to the villages, to actually dive herself into the last ethnic group of Jinuo village, to found their last inheritance leader singer, to teach their own children how to sing their own songs, but recomposed in her modern way. So when we premiered in our festival just now, it was a really big phenomenon because we never know Jinuo Zhu. Chinese never knew Jinuo. And then now all these children, after being presented with the co-production by Lincoln Center, they're going to the States. So we keep on doing new work like this to mix the creativity in the original process, but dive into future tradition, East and West. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Nina, you are working with a lot of young people. I think that's very important because that's the future. They're going to bring their, have Chinese culture, bring into inside the community. And what would you suggest that we can do to bring the young people of the two countries closer?
So bouncing off what Dong Yuanzhang 刚刚说的, you mentioned about having no 美国人 in your speech at Harvard. A story, I think, also recently that, I was thinking, because when we work with students and as a part of the onboarding process, we talk to the kids, usually one-on-one, and we usually ask them one question all the time. This is before they venture abroad to study abroad. I usually ask them, what do you think about the US? What pops into mind when you think about the US? Now, pre-pandemic, most of the answers that I get, Disneyland, Broadway, Universal Studio, Taylor Swift. So you get that. And then fast forward, 3 years, COVID, quarantine, closed down, and I get these new group of kids. They're usually in 12-year-old, 13-year-old teenagers, early teens, and I ask the same question. And a lot of the responses I get are gun violence, Asian hate, and a lot of fear. Because 3 years of these young kids never traveled abroad. And I was shocked because in seemingly 3 short years, these 3 generations of kids, their minds think differently. And then, they started to fear because they haven't seen it. They haven't lived it. They haven't met someone who's different. But a good thing is now the borders have opened and they go to American summer camp and they come back, they're so happy. They're like, I'm not shot. They hug me, they don't shoot me, which is great, right? And they make friends and then they have a great time and they wanted to go study abroad again. No matter what we tell them, it's never as effective as a lived experience. So I think, at QCEF, the Lawrenceville Civil Friends, student exchange, right? Bringing American kids here and bringing Chinese students studying in America is so crucial in shaping their minds because once you have a lived experience, once you have a human story, once you associate the U.S. with not just what you read or you swipe, but with a person, especially during your formative years. I think everybody sitting in the audience probably have someone that they are still in touch with who shape their values during formative years. When you're a teenager, your parents are probably your worst enemies. You don't listen to them. But you go to school, you make friends, you listen to your peer, you listen to your coach, your advisor, right? These are the people that really shape you. And whatever lessons that you learn from them, you take it with you, you carry it with you. It's a part of the decisions that you make. And then these young people, Americans, Chinese, they're growing up to become world leaders, to make changes, impactful changes, right? And I think that's the beauty and that's the essence of globalization. It's not driven by political agenda. It's really driven by, a need for making friends and connection, right, and shared experience. So I think, that's why these cultural exchange trips are so crucial because we're sitting here talking about the future, but these young people sitting on the side falling asleep, they are the future, right? So what you're doing is literally shaping the future. So I think it's so QCEF, the mission of it is amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. So may I have each of you have one closing remark for suggestion for our media and soft power? What should we do? What should we leave behind for the future generation?
So I will speak English, but I will defend Chinese. I think the most important, every country must defend their language. My experience, our students, international students, after 2 years, they have very good careers and they can do everything, but they want to stay in China to continue to learn Chinese because they realize that after 2 years, their Chinese is not enough. And they want to know more about China, and they are deeply convinced that if they want to continue, they must really have a better Chinese to understand, really to read, to meet much more people, etc. So I think the soft power, firstly, is the language that we defend.
Thank you.
If you want to build soft power, whether you're the United States or China, and you're messaging back and forth, you have to embrace imperfection. That is how you build credibility. People outside of China are suspicious of propaganda. So when you create a video and everything is perfect, they don't believe it. But if you add a little bit, well, this is a problem, but it's being resolved, then people will start to believe and build credibility. I've had the pleasure of having both Chinese media clients and making content for the United States, and both the United States State Department making content for China. And you have to tell stories that really reflect the truth. You can't whitewash over everything. If you tell a balanced perspective, people will be willing to believe and listen.
Very good point.
I think I want to say that with live performance platform, we really don't want to wait for the ice to form again to break it. We want the ice not to form, and we always keep on creating a warm dynamic where people can share and to create new ideas. And that's how we go into the future. And that is exactly what young people are doing. They're doing it every day on their swipes. And we as curators or administrators, we want to look at their lives and share more with them on digital platform and create this kind of digital narrative where we're telling some truth and we're telling some heartwarming stories.
I'll be quick. I think all the educators or policymakers sitting in the room, QCEF trips, definitely the best. Embrace that.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that we have a lot of room to make these relationships better. And as dean and as educator, as filmmaker, and we should really form our own narrative to have a more rounded story. We're really not afraid to tell the truth. That's very important, because if we have everything perfect, then it becomes pure propaganda. So we don't want that. People are too smart to know that we're giving them propaganda. So with that, thank you so much, and thank you, fellow panelists.
Please stay on stage for a group photo.
Thank you so much for being with us. Karl Obermann, Zhou Shuang, Nini Xue, and Dean of the Yanjing Academy at Peking University, Dean Dong Qiang. We're going to get one picture of them, and we're going to move swiftly to our last session. You know, Ruby wouldn't tell you this, but she made this extraordinary PSA, public service announcement, in the early 2000s with Magic Johnson and Yao Ming that transformed global perceptions on HIV and AIDS, showing them, these two basketball players, eating together, sharing chopsticks together, being friends together. So she's quite extraordinary. Thank you very much, Ruby, for being with us. Thank you. I would like to invite our dear friend Melody Haynes up onto the opposite stage as I briefly introduce why we're here. We started off with the Flying Tigers, and we're going to end with the Flying Tigers in tribute to the men and women as well, who fought for the Chinese and saved lives during this terrible global conflict. Well, only a couple of Christmases ago, on the night of Christmas, 25th of December, Melody and her sisters stumbled upon a journal of her father. They had no idea that he had flown multiple missions over China, including around Shanghai. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Oliver Wendell Haynes, and he was known to his friends as Windy. He served as a bombardier and navigator with the 494th Bombardment Group. He flew numerous and dangerous missions across China, as I said, including over Shanghai. Melody, please tell us what you found in those journals.
Well, thank you, James, and thank you for this moment to honor my father. Sorry, I have a cold, so there are little frogs living in my voice. So my dad, we knew he was a World War II veteran, and he talked about how proud he was to serve in the war. He signed up for the Army Air Corps right after he graduated from law school in the middle of World War II. And he and his friends all signed up to serve. So after a lot of training, marrying my mother at the last minute in San Antonio, Texas, he flew off to the Pacific Theater. Oh, there he is. He flew off to the Pacific Theater. He was in Palau and Okinawa. And while he didn't talk a lot about World War II, he told us some stories, and we certainly knew he was proud to have served and fight for his country. I think it was a time when China and the United States were allies, and they were willing to give their lives up for each other. The Chinese were willing to die for Americans, as we heard about the Burmese hump this morning, and Americans were willing to die for Chinese because it was that important to have their alliance. I think what we have lost today is the memory of that. It was 80 years ago, and Americans don't remember how close we were and how we were really willing to sacrifice. And certainly young Americans are not aware of that. And it needs to be a part of our dialogue as we talk about how strained do we want this relationship to be? And we need to remember what we were willing to do for each other 80 years ago. My dad spent much of, this is his flight jacket, much like Dr. Moore talked about this morning. And I have no idea what the Chinese says, but I know what my dad told me, and I'll share that with you. After the war, he spent much of his life in public service and worked for 25 years for the Veterans Administration as a lawyer. And he instilled in us that public service was the most honorable thing you could do in your life. And I think that's something that Max and I both believed in, and I got that from my dad. I know you got that from your parents. Max's dad also served in World War II, but he was on the other side of the planet in Europe loading bombs, so guys like my dad could push the button and drop the bombs. So that Christmas night, my sisters and I, big holiday season, we're still going through boxes in 2014, and Max and I had just moved to China. And we went through and found in the bottom of a box of pictures this typewritten, legal-size paper, typewritten transcription of his journal. We had no idea that he had done this. And like a good lawyer, he recorded it and had somebody transcribe it. So we stayed up almost all night reading through it. And much to my shock, I had just moved to China, and I found out how many missions he flew, many of them over China. And this was a time in the Pacific Theater when often 1 in 4 airplanes didn't come back that took off. So he flew 11 missions, and I'm so grateful that he was able to survive and tell us the stories. I'm going to tell you 2 stories that he told us. One was about May 4th, 1945, and it was in his journal. That was the day his friend, he called Gacy, who was a pilot, took off on the mission with all of them, and Gacy got shot down. He was my dad's best friend in camp. They weren't sure for several days whether or not he had survived and been taken captive by the Japanese or if he had died in the crash. And he found out that Gacy died. Later, my dad corresponded a lot with his family. But he also felt like it was serendipity, that was the day he first became a father. My sister was born on May 4th. He didn't find out about it for about 6 more days. But he felt like there was something serendipitous about that she came into this world the day his friend left. The other story that he would tell us, he had this little silk scarf that somebody has in our family, and they're not fessing up to it, but a silk scarf that, like his bomb jacket, had an American flag and a Chinese flag on it, and Chinese writing, and he told us that he was told that it said, "I am your friend, and if you take me to safety, we'll pay you money." And he said that on each mission, he was given Chinese currency so that if he was shot down, he didn't know how much it was, who knows how much it was, but he was instructed whoever came to his assistance, give them the money and then take your wristwatch off and give him your wristwatch. And he laughed and laughed about that he was able to keep his wristwatch all through the war, thank goodness. So I just want to say thank you so much for honoring my dad, to James and Cusif. Cusif is such an important part of the Baucus Institute, and we need to keep these memories alive of how our relationship was 80 years ago. And so now, this forum is really here to honor conflict, peace, and solidarity 80 years after World War II. So I want you to join me in welcoming 2 very special people who will remember the men and women, like my dad, whose courage and heart we remember today. Jeffrey Green is chairman of the Sino-American Aviation Heritage Foundation. He will be conversing with my very good friend, Roberta Lipson, Chair Emeritus of the American Chamber of Commerce in China. Please welcome.
Yes, well, good afternoon. It's late in the day, and we'll try to keep it lively. So I think one takeaway from today is that we're at a great moment, maybe a turning point where our leaders are talking to each other, but at the same time, we need to remember that that connection might be fragile. And as such, how important it is that we continue to do the work of changing the narrative on the people-to-people basis. And so Jeff Green has been doing that work for 30 years through his Sino-American Aviation Heritage Foundation. You founded this foundation in 1998 and have been leading the charge ever since to keep the memory alive of that really beautiful period during the dark days of the Second World War, where Americans, young boys, volunteered to come and help China defend themselves against the Japanese invasion. And also the other side of the story about Chinese people who risked their lives to rescue some of the downed pilots. So maybe you could tell us something about what inspired you to start this foundation and something about the work that you're doing now, not only with linking those veterans that were still alive, unfortunately not many of them left anymore, to the people and places that they worked in China and the people that saved them, and also how you're spreading the word among young people about the importance of this kind of friendship.
Thank you, ma'am. In 1995, I was producing television documentaries, basically military programs for the military channel. And I had met a flying tiger named, one of the original flying tigers, named Eric Schilling. And Eric invited me to their 50th anniversary in in Portland, Oregon. And for some reason, I just hit it off with him. I'd been a Marine, I'd been a pilot. My dad had served in Qingdao at the very end of World War II. So as a kid, I heard these wonderful stories about my dad, this young Marine corporal, and everything that could have happened in Qingdao in 1946 and 47. So I was always attracted to China. But anyway, we started to do a documentary. And right after that, we were invited by the Beijing Aviators Association and officers in the People's Liberation Army Air Force to come and visit China. So I'm like a kid in a candy store, like, whoa, you know? And we had 7 of the original Flying Tigers. These were the men who joined before Pearl Harbor. There were 100 of them, actually, pilots and 250 ground crew. And it was an amazing thing. President Roosevelt allowed them to leave their positions as pilots in the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. It's sort of an amazing, you think about today, that was an amazing act. So anyway, they were training in Burma when Pearl Harbor happened. And they were being led by a man named Chenault, who is probably one of the most remarkable American military officers. And I think probably, now I'll say this to the Chinese, you all know Jonah Da, I'm saying it wrong, but you have a better impression of him than we do in the United States. I think he probably did more to save Chinese lives than any foreigner in history, and in fact, I'm sure he did. He'd gone over there in 1937. He'd been an advisor to the Chinese Air Force, and the Chinese at first did really well against the Japanese, but Japan was a modern industrial country, and the Chinese could not build their own planes, and they could not train pilots. So Chenault had the idea that, well, let's bring American pilots to China let them fly, let them fight the Japanese kind of quietly until we could train more Chinese pilots in the United States. So that happened. And as I said, at Pearl Harbor, they're training in Burma, and 2 of the 3 squadrons were moved to Kunming. Kunming's a very special city. It became the home of the Flying Tigers. It was important because the Burma Road, which at that time was China's only supply route into China from the outside world. And the Japanese knew that, and they were bombing it on a daily basis. And at that point, there was no Chinese Air Force, and there were very few anti-aircraft guns. So, and I'll say this real fast, but anyway, on December 18th, they're moved to Kunming. On December 20th, they get an alert that 10 bombers are coming in. They get up, and the Japanese were not expecting anybody. They thought they were training in Burma. So here's 10 Japanese bombers, and they're just going to come in and drop their bombs and go home and do what Japanese guys do when they go home. Anyway, they were met by 16 very angry American pilots because it's 10 days after Pearl Harbor. On the day they arrived in Kunming, the Japanese had just bombed the city. So as they arrive in the city, there are dead people everywhere, men, women, and children. So on that morning, these young Americans, 16 of them, they wanted some payback. And unfortunately, the Japanese were on the receiving end of that payback. 4 of them were immediately shot down. The rest of them were shot up, but they didn't make it back to their airfields in Hanoi in one piece. And this was a tremendous uplifting for the Chinese people because the Japanese have been bombing them day in and day out since 1937. And this is where I think it's important to understand, where does the term Flying Tiger come from? Well, for 300 generations, if you look into Chinese mythology, a tiger who flies is immortal and can never be defeated. So on that day, these Chinese people, these citizens of Kunming, who'd received so much destruction from the Japanese Air Force, looked up and it was a celebration. In fact, when they landed, a group of the people from Kunming had come in with bands, fireworks, gifts, and so on. And that had not been done. So these American pilots, they were called the American Volunteer Group. They became, to every Chinese, and eventually to everyone around the world, excuse me, the Flying Tigers. So here I am, many years later, I'm invited to hang with them, and they say, Jeff, come with us to China and do your documentary. So that's my first experience in China. It was remarkable to see the way they were received by the Chinese people. And so we went back home, and we were invited back a year later. This is a good idea. So we decided to make this foundation where we could do this all the time. At that time, we would have about 700 Flying Tiger veterans as members. We would bring 500 of them to China between 1998 and 2023. Bob Moore, who you saw this morning, was one of them. We brought him 3 times. Now, parenthetically, we were at the celebration in Beijing this past September. And the Chinese government, there are 4 of our pilots still alive. So we were given medals that they gave all the veterans of World War II. So we gave 3 of the medals already to our 3 veterans, 1 in Philadelphia, who's also a Hum pilot, a fighter pilot named Harry Moyer, who we had in China 2 years ago. Harry's a young man of 105, kept his pilot's license until he was 102. Wow. A remarkable fellow. And Bob lives in Florida, so next week, Catherine and I are flying to Florida, and we're going to present him with his medal from the Chinese government. And he's very excited about that, and we're very excited to do that.
That's fantastic, Jeff. I understand that first mission wasn't just a huge morale booster to the Chinese, but also it was one of the first victorious missions of the US in the Pacific theater. So we first met 3 years ago. I happened to be in Changsha, And I was told by Ambassador Burns that there was an opening of an exhibition about the flying tigers at the Changsha Museum. And so I cut out of my meeting and I went to the opening and I met Jeff and Catherine. But the most memorable was in the lobby of the museum, there was a video playing of a loop of close-ups of these young pilots' faces. And I surprised myself because all of a sudden there were tears in my eyes because it was just so moving that these individual people, young boys, younger than my sons or around my son's age, thought to volunteer to go to this really weird place they knew nothing about on the other side of the world and defend the people there. So I was wondering, Jeff, is there one like individual story that stands out to you that you could tell us about these young boys and their origin story?
I'm so glad that Senshin, you were here. We started bringing large groups of pilots in 2005 as guests of the Friendship Association. The story I'm going to tell is about one of our pilots, Glenn Benita. Glenn had been a friend of mine. He was a board member for many years, and he came to China with us in 2000 and 2001. This whole thing is inui when you get right down to it. We were in an exhibition in Beijing on the hump flight. Glenn was a fighter pilot, not a hump pilot, but that's a different story. So a man gets up, and he had prepared a book about the American pilots who were rescued by the 4th Route Army. This was General Xiao. And General Xiao was going through the book, and he said, I personally rescued this pilot, and I rescued Glenn Benita. And I'm looking at Glenn, and he's crying. I'm looking at Glenn's wife. She's crying. I'm crying. 1,000 people are crying, you know. The moment, you know. So anyway, we came back in 2005. This was the 60th anniversary. And at that time, Li Xiaolin, I'll back up, Li Xiaolin was the vice president of the People's Association. Her father was a fellow named Li Xiaonin, who was one of the commanders of the 4th Route Army. Little stuff here. And it was like a family reunion because on May 6, 1944, Glenn was flying a P-51 Mustang from Hengyang to Hankow. It was a large mission. Glenn was flying at a high formation. There were many planes. I mean, for China, there were a lot of airplanes. In the rest of Europe and World War II, it was a few airplanes, but about 30 of them altogether. And somehow the Japanese have been able to ambush one of the groups. They were P-38s. And Glenn was in a position where he could see 3 of the P-38s being shot down. So Glenn, being the guy that he is, he drops his fuel tanks. Now, these are large fuel tanks that hang under the plane's wings. Well, one of them didn't drop. So in an airplane, when you have a 500-gallon fuel tank, it's stuck on your wing, you don't fly very well. Your plane wants to do all this stuff. So despite that, Glenn went down to save this one P-38 guy, and Glenn got shot down. So this started a story that continued and still continues. Glenn is shot down, a place called Zhenli, and the people there hide him. Now, all these operations from 1943 onward, this is the Army Air Force had taken over from the AVG earlier. All these missions are flown beyond Japanese, or in Japanese territory. No way to get out. So the villagers hid him overnight. The airplane landed in a peat bog. Glenn has taken an amazing trip to the People's Liberation Army, the 4th Route Army, which was commanded by Li Xiaolin's father, Li Xiaonin. Great story. On the way, Glenn is shot off his horse in an ambush by the Japanese. He's then rescued by a warlord army that take him to the 4th Route Army. And all told, he would spend 60 days as a guest of the Fourth Red Army. And he did some fighting with them. He fought the Japanese as an infantryman. Finally, it is arranged for him to go back. He returns to China. Li Xiaonin gives him a sword that a 3-star had been liberated from a 3-star Japanese general. And Li Xiaonin says, please give this to General Chennault. Another story. If you see the photographs of General Chennault when he married Anna Chennault, he's cutting their wedding cake with this sword. We're moving on here. So anyway, it's a great story, but it continues. Li Xiaolin and Glenn Benita and their families became great families, good friends. Now, Li Xiaonin became president of China in 1983 to 87, I believe. So it's quite a powerful, important family. Glenn would come back three or four more times. In fact, he died the day he finally, in 2011, on the day he returned home, he died. Heart gave out on him. But he said this was well worth going. So that relation continues, and I'll skip forward for a second, and I'll tell you the end of the story.
Okay, quickly, because I have something else I need you to talk about. Yes.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think Jeff could go on forever with these amazing stories, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to hear more about it. But before we're finished, I think you need to also share a little bit about your high school education program, which is, I think, one of the most impactful things that you're doing now to leverage that amazing memory for today's issues.
Yeah. I had 700 Flying Tigers in the foundation, only 4 left. So we're running out of Indians. What do we do? We came up with the idea of bringing high school, middle school, and college students to China. We formed a thing called the Flying Tiger Friendship School Program and Youth Leadership Program. So far, we have brought about 300 American students in 2 years to China. Something remarkable happened, though. We had some really strong support. In 2023, I was bringing a group of 2 Flying Tigers and 30 family members. And for some reason, I wrote to President Xi, and I told him that we were coming. I told him about the kids program. 10 days later, Shefeng's secretary, the ambassador, calls Catherine and I at 8 in the morning. Oh, you have a letter from President Xi. I said, oh, okay. And you'll get a letter this afternoon from Shefeng. So we had this magnificent letter from President Xi. This goes directly to the heart of his people-to-people program. He said he congratulated our foundation for bringing the veterans and the projects that we do. And he said, but the most important thing is your student program. He said the most important thing in our generation is that the older people instruct in history and remembering the younger generations. And he said this is important so that someday we have Flying Tigers again in our future. So from that, we just started finding schools, again working with the foundation. We now have about 110 schools in China. We're having a little problem, Mr. Ambassador, because of the student visa program, but we have an ongoing video program. And this summer, we're going to have our first summer camp in China. But we've been taking groups. We just took 120 students to China. One of the places we went to was Urumqi. Whole story there. Anyway, very long story. But anyway, this is a great program. We have several universities. We have Loyola Marymount University in California. We're developing a program with oh, for heaven's sakes, New York. Oh, God. No, the other one. Columbia. My God, Columbia. Anyway, developing one with Columbia, Baylor University. We are having some problems in Texas because of that stupid thing that you all talked about. The state colleges can't go to China because they'll be traitors or something silly. So anyway, please, okay. So anyway, it's a great program. It's getting bigger. As soon as we get a working program with the visas, we'll start bringing Chinese students here. Our foundation, we have many retired American generals and admirals, chiefs of staff of the Air Force, heads of NASA. We're going to take those kids to NASA in Texas. We're going to take them to the Air Force Museum, and we're going to teach them something important.
Amazing work. I think that this is a call to action. I mean, we watch all of the ways that we can all participate in improving the people-to-people dialogue and improving the climate. So thank you so much, Jeff, for the work you do, and to everybody here for the work we're each individually doing to that end. Thanks.
Let me say one thing. This is I've got to share with you. The Chinese amongst us will understand this. Americans don't know this. Yes, 3,000 American airmen died fighting for the Chinese people between 1941 and 1945. What we don't know is perhaps as many as 300,000 Chinese died as a direct result of helping American pilots. The Japanese said to the Chinese people, you help one of these yahoos on the parachute, we'll kill you, we'll kill your family, we'll destroy your village and your community. Don't do it. Throughout the rest of the war in Japanese-occupied China, more than 250,000 Chinese people died helping American airmen or being suspected of helping American airmen. To me, that is the greatest story of World War II, and it's so important for us all to remember. And when our kids come back from China, they understand this. They tell their parents, they tell their friends at school. So we're doing something important, and we're telling an important story.
We are. Another round of applause for all the important work.
Panelists, please stay on stage for a photo.
I get upset. We made these jackets. James, please. This is the B-15. It was worn by American pilots from 1944 on. It's an exact copy. This is the logo for the 14th Air Force that General Chennault had made. This is our logo for our foundation. And I know someone else who has one of these jackets. Many people in China, many governors, secretary generals, a lot of important people. Our board members. Ambassador谢锋. Many important people. We would like to give you one. We want to thank your organization for having us come. You're doing a magnificent job. We appreciate the photos you put outside. So we would like to give you this jacket.
Well, Jeff, if you allow me to invite our chair and vice chair to join us up over here, they'll be so happy to receive it on behalf of QSEF.
Okay.
Andy's just saying, just take it.
Okay.
I can see him out the corner of my eye. But John, perhaps, and Andy, thank you. And I'm sure what's the appropriate thing here to do is to accept it in, you have more. Do we get one each?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. In that case, guys, we're not sharing.
Don't be greedy.
I'm a size M, but S in America.
Okay.
No, seriously, thank you very much for doing this. And also, this not only goes to the heart of what Mr. Tung set up this forum and this foundation for, but it's exactly what we said this morning about that perfect circle of US, China, and other countries, given that India and Indians were also involved in the hump. So this is the perfect circle that you've drawn.
Well, you have to check it, right?
You're promoting yourself. Roberta, I need to get one for you too. Well, great, thanks. You're wonderful stories. Thank you so much. Oh. Just pretend it's the RAF.
Yeah, I know. That's my one.
Oh, you'll, no, yeah, good thing you told me. I'll just put this terrible picture of me.
Okay, so we are going to finish off this US-China-Hong Kong forum in the one way that we do each year is with our board chair, Mr. John Zhao. He opened up by talking about these wonderful circles of peace and the vision that he and Andy and the rest of the board drive through each year. I was wondering, Mr. Zhao, whether you do us a great honor by wrapping up, not just saying goodbye, but as you always do, instilling the thought leadership at the end as well. Thank you.